it was before Easter, and we went over the resurrection, the importance of the resurrection to our faith.
Yes.
And I'm thinking that today we're gonna delve a little bit deeper into the topic.
Yeah, let's go look at the resurrection a little more. It's actually very well attested by historians and then the eyewitness accounts and throughout the Gospels, as well as other historical accounts from the same time period, that Jesus lived. He lived and he died. So that's not argued about much. Mm-hmm. The question really comes down to, did he rise again? Mm-hmm. Is Jesus alive? And the resurrection is often denied. After all, who can come back from the light? Or who can come back from the dead? Mm-hmm. That's not the way death works. Yeah. Death is kind of final. But for Jesus, if he didn't rise again, then the Christian faith falls on its face. There's nothing left at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's interesting what you just said, because not only it's a problem with people, the critics for Christianity, but it's something very personal for Jewish people as well, as far as they will acknowledge that Christ was a man who lived in the time, because they have record of that. But as far as telling me that he was dead and was resurrected, they don't, that's where we run into problem. Now, Jesus predicted his own death and resurrection, right?
He sure did. Yeah, the Bible records these predictions a number of different times. So just one example, Mark 9:31, Jesus says, he said to them, the Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of his enemies. He will be killed, but 3 days later he's going to rise from the dead. That's pretty clear, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that's pretty clear. It doesn't follow to then what does it make me? I mean, if it doesn't follow to, then what does that make him?
Sure, yeah. If Jesus doesn't pull that off, he lacks the power that he claimed. I mean, at the very best, then he becomes just a man. Mm-hmm. Maybe a special man. In some sense, he was a good example. He was a great teacher. But if he says he can rise again but doesn't rise again, how good of a teacher is he? Mm-hmm. Does that kind of take away from everything he taught before? Mm-hmm. So probably worse than special. He's the one that he doesn't defend himself in his trial or before the Romans or before the Jewish people. So without the resurrection, he's not a very smart guy. He doesn't even defend himself. He doesn't try to get out of this. He just willingly goes and is crucified, dies. And on a theological level, so on a different side of it, if Jesus doesn't rise again, then how much is his sacrifice worth? Sin needed a perfect sacrifice. If Jesus doesn't rise again, was he the perfect sacrifice? Was he truly who he said he was? If he lied about his future, then he wasn't perfect. So there's all kinds of conundrums here. If he's just another man, then how could he pay for sin? How could he be God's sacrifice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So without the resurrection, Jesus will be just another man, but doesn't that contradict many things that he said or he thought? How does that affect how we view his other teaching? Because
I kind of think it cuts the legs out of everything. Mm-hmm. You lose the impact if he's not reliable as a person and in his statements about the future.
So Jesus made it to the cross, but the measures of Jesus' execution were crude, and this was in the time before modern government or medical science. How sure can we be of the actual death?
Yeah. So we can consider the cross itself. In a crucifixion. So it's tough even thinking about what Jesus endured. The victim is nailed through the wrists, and what you find medically is there's a nerve right right there where the nails would have been, and the excruciating pain. There's major nerve, and then their arms were outstretched. The pain was unbearable. And recently I read that there's actually, the pain was so bad that they created a new Latin word for it. And they invented the word excruciating. And we have that kind of drawn into English. And, but it means out of or from the cross. And it's that such extreme pain that they couldn't even describe it with a word they already had. They made a new one, and so what happens is the arms are outstretched, the nail is through that nerve, just excruciating pain, and then Jesus would have been hoisted up in the air and put on the crossbeams put on the post, the upright, and the weight of the body would pull down on the arms, and the actual joints would come out of place. And in Psalm 22, it even refers to exactly what took place, and it describes the joints being all pulled out of place. And it's a psalm that looks forward to Jesus and looks forward to the Messiah and telling what they're going to endure. And it describes exactly what happens in a crucifixion. Just the weight pulls all that apart. At the same time, the chest becomes paralyzed and the lungs fail to be able to work properly, and a person is pushed into a permanent inhale position. So you can only draw air in, but eventually you can't draw any more air in, and you can't breathe. And that's no one. I think it just humanly, no one deserves to be treated like this, and certainly not
innocent guy,
an innocent man. And no one, everyone would consider Jesus innocent, and yet he did not deserve this, but he willingly chooses it. And I talked about earlier that he didn't defend himself. He didn't try to find a way out. He didn't try to find an explanation he willingly chooses it.
Yeah, I can picture like how difficult, if not impossible, it was for somebody on the cross to breathe, because gravity is pulling.
It was that constant inhale position, so you can't breathe. And the only way you can is to force your body to exhale, so then you can take in more breath and exhale. And what it required to do that was the person on the cross would have to push on their feet, and the only thing holding up their feet was the nail through their feet. So you would have to push on that and push your lungs up to breathe, and then do that back and forth again and again and again, and remember what had taken place to Jesus's back and how torn apart it already was, and then to move in it. Have you ever had a splinter? Just a simple splinter, and to think about the jagged edge of that cross just rubbing in and out of your back as you tried to breathe and just tried to take a breath. Eventually what happens is you can't do that anymore. You run out of strength. And the victim is asphyxiated. He cannot breathe anymore, cannot get air, and has cardiac arrest and dies. And doctors talk about the shock that Jesus would have endured and go through. Here's what crucifixion was. Here's what he would have had to endure, and look at the gospel accounts and measure it. Just the shock that he already would have had because of the anxiety the night before, the beating in the morning. He already would have had a raised heart rate. His heart would have already been next to heart failure stage, and what happens at that point is your heart has a pocket that fills with liquid around it. Your lungs fill with liquid around them as you become asphyxiated and as you stop breathing. And that's what would have been taking place as Jesus cries out the words, "It is finished," and John records that. And that's I guess these are secondary points from here's the specifics of the crucifixion, but there's so much to me that says Jesus cries out and says, it's done.
Amen.
And the word means it's paid for. I mean, he's saying, I did it. I paid for sin. It's over. It's done. And yeah.
Definitely. It's personal to me too, Pastor, because I'm just taking it all in and kind of like, I'm slowly to asking you about the next question, but how does that matter in the big picture, like all this as far as,
Sure, yeah, some of those details, medical details that a person on the cross dies through asphyxiation, dies through lack of breath, that what happens at the same time is the liquid that fills and the liquid around the heart because of the heart failure, the liquid around the lungs. And all of those are kind of medical facts. But what's interesting is it connects with the gospel accounts. Mm-hmm. And in John chapter 20, 19 is in the crucifixion. And so in John 19, it gives us the clearest confirmation of Jesus' death. And to understand the resurrection, I think you have to have a clear picture that Jesus actually died. This wasn't a hoax. It wasn't just something it wasn't a trick, right? And so John gives us a very clear confirmation of Jesus' death. And the point is, the priest wanted the bodies removed, and this was during Passover. After the Passover lamb is sacrificed, it would have happened the exact same time Jesus was on the cross. That's just mind-blowing. Jesus he's the Passover lamb. Anyway, separate discussion. But that afternoon would have been previous to Sabbath. In every Passover, when the Passover lamb is sacrificed, the very next day is a Sabbath day. And what Sabbath starts at 6 p.m., the night before the next following day. So the priest, for Sabbath, you can't have dead bodies. That's just not allowed in the Jewish law. And so they wanted, and mind-blowing to me, they were so willing to throw away the law when it came to Jesus' trial and his conviction and his execution. But they would not give up the Sabbath rules. Wouldn't give them up. But they want the bodies gone before 6 p.m. And so what they asked the Romans to do, and they were agreed to do that, would be to break the legs of the criminals on the cross. And these were men that were against Rome. They were treasonous. They were maybe the worst of criminals of their day. And then there's Jesus. A huge contrast. But they asked, break the legs, because then that will start the death process.
Oh, yeah. So they wouldn't be able to push up with the legs, so they will be able to breathe, right?
Right, yeah. You take away the option of breath. And if they can't push up, they can't exhale, and they'll asphyxiate. Amazingly, sometimes people on a cross could survive 4 days, but once your legs are broken, death comes quickly, and it's all over. So the guards broke the legs of the two men next to Jesus. But when they come to Jesus, John writes that they saw that he was already dead, so they didn't break his legs. And actually, the Old Testament predicts that the Messiah would not, as the Messiah died in Isaiah, would not have any broken bones.
And the fact, like we talk about, like, whether it was dead or not, that was not even a question, because like those professionals, they know a dead man when they saw one, because they were professional in killing people, right? Right. And
yeah.
The blood and fluid that was already separated around the heart and lungs, that would have indicated he had gone into cardiac arrest and was dead, right?
Yeah, medically, according to the eyewitness evidence, there's no doubt that he died. So the fluid around the lungs and around the heart would have indicated failure, asphyxiation, heart failure. And so when the soldier pierces his hide, water comes out separate from blood. Now that doesn't happen unless Jesus has already died. And then what's neat is that evidence, that eyewitness account, comes from someone right near Jesus. And John records that someone gave direct testimony of that event. They saw it personally. It wasn't hearsay. It wasn't something they found out from somebody else. It was something they saw from a distance. It was eyewitness direct testimony of sight of that taking place. And I kind of think that was probably the soldier himself that pierced Jesus' side. And in other passages, it says the one that pierced your side would actually be impacted by possibly believe that Jesus was the true Messiah. And he provided testimony, direct confirmation that Jesus clearly died.
Yeah. You think about what we just discussed. Jesus had undergone extreme anxiety. His skin was extra sensitive, and then torn to shred. His vital organs exposed. Then his excruciating pain and being pinned to the cross. His chest paralyzed. His heart overactive, and the evidence of cardiac arrest. Death was not a certain.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty clear. No one could have survived what Jesus had been through, and then we have eyewitness reports giving evidence of his death. Jesus didn't just pass out; he died, and there's no correcting of his physical body at this point. There's no putting it back together or stitching it up. There's no reviving. He didn't just faint on the cross. Medical science today could not have helped him. I mean, there wasn't any way to recover after what he had been through.
The sighting of Jesus after his resurrection suggests Jesus was well with the scars of the cross, but not a body, not a bloody mess as he would have been, if we had just been revived. Because if you after that type of death, you don't just get up on your feet and walk around.
Right.
You need I've heard people from accident and then from they got shot or whatever. It takes a long time up for recovery.
Yes. Yeah. And 3 days later, he's seen alive and well, and there's the picture of the spear in his side and the holes in his hand and his wrist. Right. So there's evidence of the crucifixion, but you don't get the sense in any of those accounts that he has gone through crucifixion and recovered from it. It's that he's new again.
Yeah, because you will think it's a definite. It is a definite death. He literally was dead, but which kind of indicates both statement, the death and resurrection, because he was dead,
right?
Dead, but at the same time, when he was resurrected, he's totally resurrected because it's from instant to instant.
Right. Yeah. There's no doubt in my mind that Jesus died on that cross. The Romans were professional killers. They knew what they were doing. They knew how to kill. They knew how to destroy. And they did their work with precision. Jesus didn't just slip through their fingers. I mean, that didn't happen. He clearly died, and when people see him again, it's not this disfigured person
he barely made it.
Right. Yeah.
So that brings us back to evidence for the resurrection. If Jesus was truly walking around this day, 3 days after his death, and burial, then it was because, of some crucifixion. It was not like, just some crucifixion hoax, like you say. It was a true resurrection.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So let's look at some of the other pieces of the puzzle. And there's a whole lot more to this, and so we can go back and continue to look at the evidence, kind of see what do the eyewitness accounts say about the resurrection. What does it tell us about the reality of Jesus' life? What are some of the things we can learn from those witnesses and from 3 days after Jesus was buried?
Yeah, yes, definitely. Now I know you have some books for recommendation, but I wanted to ask you that. This is just burning questions in my heart. It's like, who are we to, tell God, like the Bible say, God never takes counsel from anybody, but what a way of death, like God will choose to manifest, like express his love to the world, is by choosing that type of things that, because if just death was the issue, like there are so many different ways that people. My sister used to watch a show. They say 10,000 ways to die, but there are so many ways like people could die, but God chose that particular type of death, like to express His love to the world. And just thinking about the whole scenario, it's.
Yeah, we've talked about the gospel. We've talked about the bad news of we can't get to God. We are imperfect, and we sin, and we mess up, and we do evil, and and doing what is right is not just about the outward action. It's about the heart. Our minds think about things we ought not. Our heart has attitudes and hate, and we fight these things, but they're still a part of us humanly. We cannot ever earn and attain the place of God. So God came after us. Mm-hmm. And I think of the destruction of sin and the sadness of sin and the pain that sin causes. And God chose the worst possible execution to point us to how much sin costs, how much sin hurts, how bad it is. And Jesus, He's taking our place. What king would ever choose to put his son through that? God did it because He loves us.
Yeah.
Don't deserve it.
Amen. Yeah. Now I mentioned you're gonna go over some recommendations for us.
Yeah. We last time we talked about Lee Strobel and his book, The Case for Faith, and so this book is his first book, The Case for Christ, and it's a way you can actually. We talked about some of the things that Lee even puts in this book today. And you can dig in, you can learn more, you can learn about more about Jesus, more about the manuscripts, the reality or the reliability of the Bible, the reliability of some of the accounts of the death, burial, resurrection, some of the eyewitnesses. But Lee Strobel, he was an atheist, and so he was a reporter. He went around. He dove in and tried to find the truth of stories and problems in society and wrote about them. And so he brought all of his detective ability and his reporter ability to this book, and it was his pursuit ultimately to disprove Christianity. He wanted to disprove it. If you learn about Lee, his wife had become a Christian and he was an atheist, and he wanted to make sure she clearly knew that Christianity was impossible. And so he pursued destroying Christianity by trying to disprove the eyewitness accounts and disprove the reality of the resurrection. But he puts his journey into this book, and he goes and he talks to some of the experts in the field and some of the people that know the most about different areas, and he just digs in and digs in and digs in and learns more and more about the death of Christ. He learns about the medical evidence. He learns about the resurrection. And in the end, he can't deny the overwhelming sense that this is true and it is real, and he couldn't deny the reality of Jesus and the resurrection. And so, if you want to dig in further and learn more, Case for Christ is an awesome resource to learn about faith. If you're asking questions and you wonder about some of the things that we've talked about, here's a great way to learn a little bit more and dig in further.